The sterile white of the Morehouse School of Medicine auditorium was a stark contrast to the kaleidoscope of colors worn by the proud, cheering families. In the third row, Aisha Tente sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale against her dark skin. The air was thick with perfume, hope, and the collective sigh of 1,000 relieved parents. On stage, her husband, Malik Sterling, stood tall in his cap and gown, a brilliant smile splitting his face as he received his medical degree. Aisha's heart swelled, a bittersweet cocktail of pride and a fatigue so deep it felt woven into her bones. 7 years, not 5, but 7. 2 extra years because Malik had to repeat his second year after failing a crucial set of exams. 2 extra years of her life poured into the gap. She looked down at her hands, capable, strong hands that had changed bedpans at the nursing home night shift, hands that had painstakingly assembled circuit boards at the electronics factory day shift, hands that had typed term papers for him when he was too overwhelmed. These hands had not held a paintbrush in 7 years, though that had been her dream once, to be an artist. That dream had been quietly boxed away, like the unused canvases in their cramped apartment storage closet. Beside her, Malik's mother, Eleanor Sterling, dabbed at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. She was a vision of Southern aristocratic elegance in a cream-colored St. John suit, her silver hair coiffed to perfection. "My Malik," she sighed to the woman next to her. "A doctor at last. I always knew he was destined for greatness." Her eyes, the color of chilled sherry, slid to Aisha's simple, store-bought lavender dress. The disapproval was a physical chill. Aisha ignored it. Today was the reward. Today, the grinding sacrifice would transform into a shared future. Or so she believed. The ceremony ended in a roar of applause. Malik descended from the stage, a conquering hero. He swept his mother into a lavish embrace. "We made it, Mama!" "You made it, baby," she corrected, kissing his cheek. "All that hard work." Then he turned to Aisha. His hug was brief, one-armed. "Hey, you got the tickets?" "Tickets?" Aisha blinked. "For the cruise, the 7-day Caribbean cruise to celebrate. I emailed you the confirmation last week." His tone held a hint of annoyance, as if she had forgotten to pick up milk. Aisha's stomach tightened. She had no such email. She had been covering a double shift for a sick coworker all week. I must have missed it. A cruise sounds wonderful." "It's booked. We leave for Miami tomorrow. Mom's coming, of course." "Of course," Aisha echoed, the first thread of unease weaving through her joy. That evening, the celebration was not at a restaurant, but at Eleanor's meticulously restored antebellum-style home in Buckhead, a world away from Aisha's childhood in College Park. The air smelled of old money, lemon polish, and gardenias. Malik held court by the marble fireplace, surrounded by relatives and family friends who spoke of investments, golf handicaps, and which private practice group he should join. Aisha circulated with a tray of canapes, feeling like hired help. Eleanor had suggested she assist the catering staff to "make yourself useful, dear." After an hour, Malik clinked a crystal glass. "Everyone, if I could have your attention." He beamed, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Aisha's breath caught. A gift? An apology for the forgotten cruise email? Her heart dared to hope. "This journey," Malik began, his voice resonant, "has been one of perseverance, of surrounding oneself with the right people who lift you up to your rightful station." His eyes found Aisha's, but they looked through her, not at her. "And now that I'm entering this new chapter, it's time to ensure my environment reflects my aspirations." He opened the box. Nestled inside was not a ring for Aisha, but a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a caduceus. "A gift to myself," he announced, slipping it on. The crowd chuckled appreciatively. Then he reached for a long cream-colored envelope on the mantelpiece. "Aisha, come here." Puzzled, she set down the tray and walked to him. He handed her the envelope. "This is for you, the first dividend of our new life." Her fingers, clumsy with surprise, tore the flap. It was a brochure for the Savannah College of Art and Design, a glossy pamphlet for their continuing education program. A sticky note was attached in Malik's handwriting. "Thought you could use a hobby now that the real work is done." The room seemed to tilt. A hobby. 7 years of her life, her dreams, her sweat, reduced to a footnote before his real work? Eleanor's tinkling laugh cut through the murmur of the crowd. How thoughtful, Malik! A little arts and crafts class. Every doctor's wife needs a diversion. Malik smiled, a patronizing curve of his lips. Exactly. Something to keep you occupied. The words were a scalpel, precise and devastating. This wasn't just ingratitude. It was an erasure. She wasn't being promoted to the role of doctor's wife. She was being pensioned off to the sidelines with a childish pastime. The burning humiliation in her chest didn't explode into tears. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and diamond sharp. She looked at Malik, at his new ring, at his oblivious pride. She looked at Eleanor's smug satisfaction. She carefully folded the brochure, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. A hobby, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. How prescriptive of you, Malik. His smile faltered. It's a gift, Aisha. No, a gift is something you give freely. This is a relocation package. You're moving me out of the narrative of your success. She took a step forward, her gaze locking on his. You speak of the right people lifting you up. For 7 years, I wasn't just a person, Malik. I was the foundation. I was the lift, the pulley, the damned engine. And now you want to stick me in the attic with a box of crayons? Eleanor gasped. Aisha, mind your tone. Show some gratitude. Gratitude? Aisha turned the full force of her glare on the older woman. For what? For you treating me like hired help for a decade? For you whispering in his ear that I was unpolished? I have receipts for my gratitude, Eleanor. They're in a filing cabinet under S for sterling, Malik, tuition, rent, utilities, food. They total $412,843.73. Would you like to see them? Malik's face drained of color. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you didn't earn this degree, Malik. You financed it with my life. And the repayment plan just got very, very complicated. She reached into her small clutch, not for a tissue, but for her phone. She dialed a number, putting it on speaker. The room was frozen, a tableau of shock. A brisk and professional voice answered, Law offices of Vance and Croft. Marlon Vance, please. It's Aisha Kente. Code 7 is active. A man's voice came on, deep and calm. Aisha, I'm listening. The trigger event has occurred. As we anticipated, please initiate project reclamation, full audit, and send the initial notice of intent to sue to Dr. Malik Sterling's new hospital, CO of the Chief of Staff today. Malik stumbled back as if struck. Sue? What intent? Aisha, have you lost your mind? No, Malik. I found my leverage. You see, while you were memorizing the Krebs cycle, I was learning contract law, community property laws, and the statute of limitations on financial fraud within a marriage. I addressed the phone again. Marlon, also file the injunction to freeze all joint assets, including the newly opened Sterling Future Fund brokerage account, the one with the $25,000 deposit from his new sponsor, Dr. Evans. Malik's jaw dropped. He'd opened that account 2 days ago. How could she possibly know? Eleanor shrieked, You vindictive little gold digger! You're trying to ruin him! Aisha finally let a smile show, but it held no warmth. I'm not trying to ruin him, Eleanor. I'm auditing him. I provided capital for an enterprise, his medical career. The enterprise is now profitable. I'm here for my equity share, plus interest, and for the breach of our partnership agreement. That would be our marriage vows. She looked at the horrified faces of the guests, some of whom were now edging toward the door. Ladies and gentlemen, the celebration appears to be over. My apologies for the disruption. The legal proceedings will be considerably less festive. She turned and walked out of the grand house, the weight of 7 years sloughing off her shoulders with each step. She didn't go to Nia's. She went directly to a small, secure office park in Decatur, where Marlon Vance, a shark in a pinstripe suit who specialized in forensic matrimonial finance, had a conference room ready. The paperwork is all prepared, Aisha, Marlon said, spreading documents across the table. As we discussed, the promissory note, backdated and notarized by our friend who was a notary in 17, the itemized ledger, The copies of every check, every wire transfer, every loan for living expenses you documented. It's beautiful. He'll claim duress, but the paper trail is a masterpiece. He'll settle, Aisha said, her voice devoid of emotion. His pride is big, but his fear of scandal is bigger. The hospital won't tolerate a new resident with a massive public lawsuit for fraud. He'll give me what I want to make it go away quietly. Which is, Marlon asked, though he already knew the plan. Not a lump sum. That ties me to him. I want a structured settlement. 15% of his gross annual income, pre-tax, for the next 25 years, paid quarterly into a trust, adjusted for inflation. If he misses a single payment, the full principal of $412,867 becomes due immediately, plus penalties. Whistle. That's, elegantly brutal. It's a financial leash. It's an annuity, Aisha corrected, funded by the asset I built. And I want one more thing. The copyright to his life story for the first 10 years of his medical practice. He signs over the rights. Any book deals, movie options, inspirational speaking, I own the rights. He can be a doctor, but I control the narrative. Marlon smiled, a true appreciative smile. You should have been the lawyer. I had to be everything else. It was time to add that to the list. The ensuing legal battle was short, vicious, and entirely one-sided. Confronted with the mountain of evidence and the threat of career implosion before it even began, Malik folded. He signed a settlement agreement, his hand shaking with a fury that promised eternal hatred. Eleanor was apoplectic, but powerless. Aisha took her first quarterly payment and vanished. Not to a small town, but overseas. She used a fraction of the money to enroll in a prestigious art conservation program in Florence, Italy. Aisha Kente ceased to exist on social media in public records. She became Chiara Neri, a quiet, talented student with a mysterious past. 1 year later, Dr. Malik Sterling was not living in a penthouse. The massive, guaranteed drain on his income made reckless luxury impossible. He lived in a comfortable but unspectacular condo, drove a reliable sedan, and seethed. Every quarterly payment to the Kente Trust was a fresh humiliation. He was a skilled surgeon, rising quickly at Atlanta General, but the financial handcuffs chafed. He took on extra shifts, lucrative consultancies, anything to offset the bleed. He also became secretive, paranoid. He started dabbling in high-risk, high-reward cryptocurrency trading on the side, using a secret online alias. He was chasing the big score that would free him from Aisha's shadow. One night, after a grueling 14-hour shift and a disastrous crypto trade that wiped out $50,000, he was driving home through a pounding rainstorm. Exhausted, frustrated, and distracted by a flashing notification on his illicit trading app, he ran a red light. The collision was catastrophic. A delivery truck T-boned his sedan at 40 miles per hour. Malik awoke 3 days later in the ICU. His medical knowledge assessed the damage before the pain fully registered. Multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, a shattered right femur, and his hands. His magnificent, skilled surgeon's hands. The right one was a mangled ruin of bone and tendon, crushed in the impact. The left had severe nerve damage. The head of orthopedics, a friend, gave him the prognosis with grim sympathy. Malik, the right hand, we can reconstruct it, but fine motor control, microsurgery, it's incredibly unlikely. The left has a chance with multiple aggressive therapies, but it will never be 100%. I'm so sorry. His career as a cutting-edge surgeon was over before it had truly begun. The physical pain was nothing compared to the psychic obliteration. His identity, his pride, his entire sense of self, all were built on those hands. Without them, he was just a man with a useless degree and a crushing debt to a ghost. Worse than the medical bills, his insurance was good, but not perfect, was the settlement with Aisha. The contract was ironclad. It was based on gross income. If he couldn't work, his income was zero, but the obligation didn't vanish. The inflation-adjusted payments kept accruing. He was hemorrhaging money he didn't have, going deeper into debt just to pay the woman who had already taken his future. His mother, her own finances strained without Malik's full support, could offer little but weeping recriminations. "I told you she was trouble. That witch has cursed you from afar." Desperation became his new constant. He needed a new career, and fast. He leveraged his medical knowledge into a consultant role for a medical malpractice law firm. It was literative, but it tasted like ashes. He was using his mind to dismantle other doctors, a vulture picking over the carcasses of a career like the one he had lost. And then the emails started. They arrived in his personal inbox, the one not linked to his public life. The first had no subject, just a link to a YouTube video. It was a news segment from a small Italian arts channel. The reporter was interviewing a rising star in art restoration, a woman who had just uncovered a lost fresco technique in a minor Medici chapel. The woman's face was partly in shadow, her hair different, her demeanor calm and authoritative. But Malik's heart stopped. It was Aisha. The reporter asked about her background. "I come from a place of broken things. I learned that with patience, the right tools, and an understanding of the original structure, even the most shattered masterpiece can speak again. My past taught me to see value where others see only ruin." The video ended. The message was clear. "I am thriving. You are broken." The next email came a week later, a single PDF. It was a financial statement for the Kente Trust. It showed the steady quarterly deposits from Malik and then a list of disbursements: tuition for a girls' coding school in Ghana, a grant for a community art studio in Detroit, a scholarship in the name of Aisha Kente for a single mother pursuing a nursing degree. His money funding the dreams of others. The final line was a note: broadcasting good, compound interest on a different kind of investment. He was funding her philanthropy. His ruin was her platform for sainthood. The horror wasn't just financial or professional, it was psychological. She was in his head, a ghost curator of his downfall. He became obsessed. He hired a private investigator out of what was left of his savings. The PI was good. He found Chiara Neri in Florence, confirmed it was Aisha. He sent photos. Aisha laughing in a sun-danced piazza, Aisha concentrating in a lab, Aisha looking more alive and at peace than she had ever in Atlanta. "She's untouchable," the PI reported. "Legally, she's clean. The trust is managed by a Swiss firm. She's got EU residency. There's no angle." Malik's despair curdled into a venomous rage. It focused on one thing: the settlement contract. If he could prove fraud, prove the promissory note was forged, prove something, he could break it. He began spending his nights poring over the documents, looking for a flaw, a misplaced date, an inconsistent signature. He neglected his consulting work. He became gaunt, paranoid, jumping at shadows. One stormy night, hunched over his computer in his dark condo, he found it, or so he thought. The notary's stamp on the key promissory note, the notary's commission number. In his frantic, sleepless research, he cross-referenced it with the state database. The notary's commission had expired 3 weeks before the date on the document Aisha had presented. A wild, desperate hope surged in him. It was a mistake, a flaw. His hands, clumsy and scarred, fumbled to call Marlon Vance's office. He left a raving, triumphant message about fraud and nullification. He didn't notice the second email that arrived that night. It was from an anonymous server. It contained no text, just an audio file. When he played it, it was the clear, digital recording of a conversation from years ago. His own voice, young and arrogant, filled the room. "Mama, don't worry about it. Aisha's got it covered. She'll pick up more shifts. What's she gonna do, leave? She's invested. She's in too deep. By the time I'm done, she'll be so far behind me she'll need a telescope to see my taillights." A pause, then Eleanor's voice. "Just make sure you keep the accounts separate, baby. Her name on nothing. When you're ready to upgrade to a model that fits, we don't want any messy entanglements." Please, I've got it under control. She's a means to an end. A very diligent, very useful means. The recording ended. A second file followed. It was a video, timestamped from the night of his graduation party. It showed Malik, from a high angle, a hidden phone in a bookcase, opening the velvet box with his ring, then picking up the SCAD brochure. It showed his smirk as he wrote the note, calling it a hobby. It captured the entire devastating exchange in crystalline detail. The final message appeared on his screen, text only. The notary error was a clerical mistake by the county, corrected the following month. The amended record is attached. The contract remains valid. As for the rest, think of this as your final lesson in consequences, Malik. You built your dream on a foundation of sand and contempt. I merely recorded the erosion. The next payment is due in 14 days. The trust has obligations to meet. ... O. He stared at the screen, the last of his fight draining away. She hadn't just outmaneuvered him legally or financially, she had outmaneuvered him morally. She had preserved the evidence of his own petty, exploitative heart and held it up as the justification for everything. He wasn't a victim of a gold digger. He was a fool being held accountable by the very conscience he had assumed was irrelevant. The horror was complete. It wasn't the horror of a monster in the dark. It was the horror of a mirror held up in broad daylight, showing him the monster he had been, and the hollow, broken man he had become. His debt to her wasn't just money. It was a debt of dignity, and it was one his remaining life would be spent paying, with no hope of forgiveness or release. She had turned his own victory into her masterpiece of restoration, and his life into the shattered frescoes she had learned to repair on others. He was no longer a doctor. He was a cautionary tale, and she was the author. Dr. Sterling, the trust has received your notification. Enclosed is a temporary forbearance agreement suspending payments for 12 months with accrued interest waived. This is not forgiveness. It is a recalibration of the investment. A non-performing asset is of no value. The clinic you now work in serves a population with a 40% readmission rate for septic complications. Your predecessor had a 38% rate. Lower it. Improve the protocols. Teach your methods. The metric is clear. Succeed, and the forbearance may be extended. The trust invests in outcomes, not excuses. Broadcasting good requires functional instruments. A. Kente, Trustee. Enclosed was a peer-reviewed study from a Scandinavian journal on innovative, low-cost wound packing techniques. It was exactly the kind of research his underfunded clinic needed. Malik felt a dizzying swirl of emotions: rage at her continued oversight, shame at being so transparently managed, and a perverse, grudging respect for the cold logic of it. She wasn't letting him off the hook. She was redirecting his labor. His penance would be measured in reduced suffering for others. He showed the letter to Dr. Petrova. She read it, her eyebrows climbing. You have a unique benefactor. The study is excellent. Can you implement it? I have to, Malik said, his voice flat. He threw himself into the work with a desperate intensity. He implemented the new protocols. He badgered the administration for better supplies. He held impromptu teaching sessions for the nurses. He learned patients' names, their stories. He saw the human cost of poverty and systemic neglect every day. 6 months in, Dr. Petrova called him into his office. The readmission rate is down to 22%. The hospital board noticed. They're increasing the clinic's budget. And they're offering you a permanent, salaried position as associate director. It was the first genuine professional victory he had since the accident. It felt different. It wasn't a trophy. It was a foundation. That night, he received another email. No video, no audio, no financials, just a link to an Italian real estate website. It showed a charming, sunlit villa for sale in the Tuscan hills outside Florence. The price was exorbitant. The subject line was a single word: aspiration. The message was clear. This is the life your money is building for me. But for the first time, the sting was less acute. He looked around his modest, clean apartment. He thought of Mrs. Henderson, whose diabetic foot he'd saved from amputation that week, and her tearful, grasping hug. The villa felt like a picture in a magazine. Beautiful, but unreal. His reality, painful and humble as it was, had a weight to it now. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Aisha, Chiara, stood on a scaffold in the Basilica di Santa Croce. A soft brush in her hand, she was meticulously cleaning centuries of grime from the edge of a Giotto fresco, revealing a sliver of brilliant blue that had been hidden for generations. The physical work was a meditation. The satisfaction was pure. Her life in Florence was a quiet masterpiece of her own design. She had friends, fellow restorers, historians, a local bookseller. She had love, a gentle, kind-eyed archaeology professor named Luca, who appreciated her mind and never asked about the wellspring of her financial independence. She returned to her studio apartment overlooking the Arno River one evening to find Luca waiting, his expression troubled. "Amore, a woman was here asking for you. An American journalist. Lena Reed. She was very polite, but persistent. She said she's doing a long-form piece on the anatomy of gratitude and revenge. She mentioned Atlanta and a doctor." Aisha's blood ran cold, but her face remained serene. The past had sent a scout. Lena Reed was good. She'd found the connection between Chiara Neri and the vanished Aisha Kente. "Thank you, Luca. I will handle it." "Chiara, is there something to handle?" His concern was genuine, not accusatory. "There is a story," she said carefully. "It is not a happy one, and it belongs to someone who doesn't exist anymore. I have no wish to tell it." She knew avoidance was not a strategy with someone like Lena. She contacted Marlon Vance, who was now more of a business manager than a litigator for her. "Lena Reed is ethical, but she's a bloodhound. She's connected you to the trust to Malik. She's digging into the accident, his career change. She smells an epic tale of karmic justice." "I don't want an epic," Aisha said, watching the sunset paint the river gold. "I want peace." "Then you have to give her a story, a better one than the one she can piece together from shadows and court documents." Aisha pondered this. The narrative was her weapon, but it could also be her shield. She drafted an email to Lena Reed, inviting her to Florence for an interview, with strict conditions. They met in a quiet, sun-drenched piazza cafe, away from Aisha's usual haunts. Lena was sharp, observant, her recorder on the table between them. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Neri, or is it Ms. Kente?" "Chiara is fine. I agreed to meet to offer context, not confession," Aisha said, her voice calm. "You are crafting a narrative about betrayal and revenge. That is a simple story, and not the true one." "Then what is the true one?" Lena leaned forward. "It is a story about a failed investment," Aisha said, choosing her words with the care of a restorer selecting a solvent. "I invested my youth, my labor, my faith in a person and a shared dream. The person changed. The dream became his alone. The investment failed. What followed was not revenge, but asset recovery and risk mitigation. Asset recovery that has funded a new life of remarkable success and philanthropy, while the other party is, by all accounts, struggling." Aisha sipped her espresso. "Struggling is a relative term. He is alive. He is working as a physician serving a vulnerable population. Is that not a form of success? The original investment was a doctor. That asset, though damaged, is still functioning in the social role it was funded for. The trust's forbearance is an acknowledgement of that continued function." Lena's eyes narrowed. You're reframing a punitive financial settlement as continued portfolio management. I am stating facts. The legal structure ensures accountability. His current work ensures utility. My work here, she gestured at the ancient city around them, ensures that the capital generated is not hoarded, but recycled into beauty, education, and opportunity. It is a closed loop. Justice is not a moment of punishment, it is a sustainable system. And the personal? The humiliation, the pain? Aisha met her gaze steadily. That is the personal, and it is mine. It is the why of the initial investment, but the what that followed, the legal, financial, practical structure, that is a matter of public record. I am choosing to define the story by the what, not the why. The why is a private wound. The what is a public trust. Which makes for a better story, Miss Reed? About a cold, brilliant financial and social engineering project is compelling, but it's not human. Readers want the wound. Then they will have to be satisfied with the scar, Aisha said, standing up, and the knowledge that the scar tissue is funding a girls' school in Accra. The article is yours to write. I will not comment further, but know this. If you publish anything that exposes my location or endangers my peace, the full, unedited audio and video archives of Malik and Eleanor Sterling's private conversations will be released to every media outlet on Earth. Not by me, by an automated dead man's switch. I have built a life, Lena. I protect what I build. It was a threat delivered with icy calm. Lena Reed left Florence with a fascinating, frustrating story, a tale of sublime, almost alien justice, but not the visceral, emotional reckoning she'd sought. Her eventual article, published in a highbrow monthly, was titled The Ledger and the Lifeline, Accounting for a Broken Dream. It painted Aisha as a brilliant remote figure who had turned personal catastrophe into a philanthropic engine, and Malik as a chastened man finding a different path. It was a story of systems, not souls. It was, as Aisha intended, manageable. Years flowed. The forbearance on Malik's debt became a permanent modification. Payments resumed, but were capped at a percentage of his salary from the wound care clinic, which grew as the clinic's reputation did. He became a recognized expert in palliative wound management. He published papers. He found a quiet, deep satisfaction in the work. He even began a tentative, respectful friendship with Dr. Petrova. He heard through the medical grapevine that his mother, Eleanor, had found an unexpected niche volunteering as a patient advocate in a cancer hospice. Her social skills finally turned towards genuine solace. The world they had coveted had rejected them, but in the rebel, they had each found a purpose that fit their broken pieces. One autumn afternoon, a package arrived at Malik's office. No return address. Inside was a book, a gorgeous, glossy art book titled The Unseen, Rediscovered Masters of the Florentine Renaissance. The authorship was credited to a consortium, but the lead researcher was listed as Chiara Neri. He flipped through it, seeing breathtaking before and after images of restored artworks. On the dedication page it read, "For all the silent partners, for the foundations unseen." Tucked into the middle of the book was a postcard, a simple image of the Ponte Vecchio at dawn. On the back, in the now familiar handwriting, was a single line. The ledger is balanced. The broadcast continues. You are free. No signature. Malik sat in his office for a long time, the book open on his desk. The weight that had lived in his chest for a decade, the weight of debt, of shame, of her relentless gaze, suddenly shifted. It didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the crushing burden of a sentence. It was the sober weight of a lesson learned, a life lived differently. He was free, not from the memory or the consequences, but from her. Her project with him was complete. She had extracted her equity, enforced her accountability,
And now, having deemed the assets sufficiently restructured and repurposed, she was closing the file. He walked to the window of his clinic, looking out at the bustling Atlanta street. He thought of his patients. He thought of the small, good things he did each day. He thought of the villa in Tuscany he would never see, and the woman who lived there, who had once been his wife and was now the architect of a justice so complete it had circles back to resemble a strange, severe form of grace. He was not on her level. He never would be. She was a curator of legacies, restoring old masterpieces and building new ones from the fragments of broken promises. He was a clinic doctor, tending to wounds that might never fully heal. But for the first time, that felt enough. The debt was paid. Not in the currency he had expected, but in the coin of a usable, humble, redeemed life. He picked up his chart for the next patient, a man with a stubborn venous ulcer, and walked down the hall. The work awaited. His own work. Finally, truly, his own. Malik felt a cold dread. The human angle would inevitably lead back to the accident, the lawsuit, the mysterious trust, to Aisha. The narrative would be seized, twisted, turned into the very emotional epic she had so carefully avoided. "I'm not interested in a personal story," he said, his voice firm. "Only the medical work." "But the work is informed by the personal journey. That's what connects with viewers." "No," Malik said, a surprising steel in his voice. He had been a puppet in Aisha's narrative for too long. He would not be a puppet in a feel-good TV narrative either. "The work is informed by medical training and clinical observation. My personal journey is private. It's non-negotiable." Chloe left, disappointed. But the seed was planted. The world was beginning to look at him again. And if it looked too closely, it would find the ghost of Aisha Kente in the machinery of his life. He needed to know what she knew. He needed to see the full ledger. In Florence, Aisha's piece was deeper than the Arno, but not without its currents. Luca had proposed. It was a tender, joyful moment under the stars on the Piazzale Michelangelo. She had said yes, her heart full. But a part of her, a part she thought she had bricked over, trembled. To marry Luca meant truly burying Aisha Kente. It meant potential scrutiny, background checks for a fiancé visa if they moved, shared financial histories. The elegant, self-contained fortress she had built for Chiara Neri would have to have a gate, and gates could be breached. She hired a new specialist, not a lawyer, but a digital legacy manager named Klaus, based in Berlin. His job was to deepen Chiara's backstory, to create a plausible, uninteresting past for her that would withstand moderate scrutiny. School records in Canada, a deceased aunt as a benefactor. It was a delicate, expensive operation. While reviewing the fabricated documents, Klaus sent her an alert. There is low-level media interest in the United States re-engaging with the Sterling narrative. A medical documentary producer is sniffing around. The connection to you remains obscure, but the legal settlement is a public record. A determined researcher could theoretically follow the money from the trust to some of its overseas disbursements, which have a tenuous link to banking corridors we've used. Aisha felt the old, cold vigilance return. Not fear, but strategic calculation. Malik was becoming visible again. His visibility was a threat to her opacity. She did not contact him. Instead, she initiated Project Mosaic. She instructed Marlon Vance to begin the legal, meticulous process of dissolving the Kente Trust. Its assets would be distributed to its beneficiary projects outright. Its accounts closed. The paper trail would end. Simultaneously, Klaus began weaving a secondary, more robust identity for her within the EU. A birth certificate, tax history, the whole intricate tapestry of a real person. Chiara Neri would become bulletproof, and Aisha Kente would cease to exist even as a financial entity. It was the final logical step. Sever the last cord. But as she signed the dissolution papers, she felt a pang that was not strategic. It was the pang of a storyteller ending a very long, very personal book. She had spent years crafting the narrative of consequence for Malik. Now she was writing the end, and it felt curiously empty. Malik's attempt to see the ledger began with the one person he thought might have a piece of it. The private investigator he'd hired years ago, a grizzled man named Foster who was now semi-retired. "You want me to find what?" Foster asked over a static-filled phone line. "Not her, not where she is. I want to know what she knows, the evidence she gathered. You found some of it. There must have been more, emails, bank records, things before the final act." Foster was silent for a long time. "Sterling, that woman, she wasn't just collecting receipts. She was building a case for The Hague. What you're asking for? It's not just files. It's the blueprint of your own damnation. You sure you can handle it?" "I need to see it," Malik insisted, a morbid curiosity now driving him. "I need to understand the scale of it." What Foster delivered, for a hefty final fee, was not a comprehensive file, but a fragment. A single encrypted USB drive. On it was a folder labeled Pattern of Practice. It contained surveillance reports, not of him with other women, but of his spending. Timestamp photos of him buying the expensive signet ring the week he told Aisha they couldn't afford her dental work. Bank statements showing transfers to a secret brokerage account alongside highlighted rent payments from Aisha's account for the same period. It was a forensic accountant's dream. But the most devastating file was a video. It was from a nanny cam, he realized with a sick jolt, in their old apartment. The angle was from a bookshelf in the living room. On screen, a younger, exhausted-looking Aisha was on the couch, wrapping her feet after a double shift. Malik walked into the frame, fresh from the library. He didn't look at her. He went to the fridge, complained there was no real food, just her diet stuff. He took the last yogurt. "I was saving that for my lunch tomorrow," she said softly, not looking up. "I'm studying for the USMLE, Aisha. I need brain food. You can grab something at the cafeteria." He walked out. The video cut to another day. Aisha, clearly ill, was taking her temperature. Malik on the phone with his mother was laughing. "No, Mama, she's fine. Just a bug. She's tough. Yeah, the check should cover that membership fee. Thanks." The clip ended. It was nothing dramatic. No shouting, no violence. It was a study in mundane contempt, in passive erasure. It was the 1,000 paper cuts that had bled her dry before the graduation party. She hadn't just recorded the final betrayal, she had documented the entire climate of their marriage. What Malik saw was a post-mortem report. He'd watched it alone in his dark apartment, and for the first time, he didn't see himself as the unfairly persecuted hero of his own story. He saw a stranger, a calloused, entitled, emotionally stunted user. The asset Aisha had invested in was not just a medical student, it was a fundamentally flawed human being. Her lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was a devastating clinical report on his character. The horror that washed over him was new. It wasn't the horror of being caught or of losing his hands. It was the horror of seeing himself. The ledger wasn't just financial, it was moral. And he was bankrupt. He didn't sleep. At dawn, he drove to the wound care clinic hours early. He sat at his desk, the ghost of his past self choking him. Mr. Armitage's case file was on top of his inbox. Look at the edges. He had looked at the edges of a wound and found a systemic disease. He had spent a decade looking at the edges of his own life through Aisha's lens and had seen only his own victimhood. He had never truly diagnosed the core sickness, his own entitlement. He picked up a pen, his damaged hand clumsy. He began to write. Not a letter to Aisha. He had no right. He wrote a document for himself, a personal diagnostic report. He listed the symptoms: grandiosity, lack of empathy, exploitation, deceit. He listed the etiology: parental idolation, systemic privilege, unchecked ambition. The prognosis, untreated: moral necrosis. The treatment plan was the hardest part. He had been undergoing a forced treatment for years, Aisha's settlement, the clinic work. But compliance had been coerced. True treatment had to be voluntary. It had to be ongoing. It would never result in a cure, only management.
He made a list. 1. Full financial transparency with Eleanor. Disentangle her from his remaining debts. 2. Pro bono work. Establish a weekly free clinic session in the wound care center. 3. Mentorship. Actively seek out a struggling resident or medical student from an underserved background, not for glory, but for guidance he never had. 4. Amend the documentary deal. Agreed to participate, but only if the focus is exclusively on the patients and the medicine of chronic care. Donate any fee to the clinic's supply fund. It was a start. It was taking the scalpel she had wielded and attempting, clumsily, to perform surgery on himself. The dissolution of the Kente Trust triggered an automatic final notification to Malik. The official letter from Vance and Croft was dry, legal. The obligation was terminated, all future payments canceled. No further contact would be necessary. This time, the freedom felt different. It didn't feel like being fired. It felt like a graduation. His sentence was served. His parole was his own to manage. He threw himself into his treatment plan. He had the difficult conversation with Eleanor, laying bare his remaining finances. To his shock, she didn't crumble. "I've been balancing my own checkbook at the hospice for 5 years, Malik. I think I can handle it. Maybe we both needed to be cut off from that old life to learn how to stand on our own." He started the free clinic. It was draining, logistically difficult, and profoundly right. He found his mentee, a brilliant but burnout-prone young black woman named Simone, who was struggling through her surgical residency. He didn't offer platitudes. He offered practical advice on navigating hospital politics, on managing stress, on finding meaning in the grind. He told her once, "Don't let the institution convince you your worth is only in the dramatic saves. Sometimes the most important medicine is the stubborn daily prevention of a catastrophe." He was talking about wounds. He was also talking about lives. The documentary crew, having agreed to his terms, filmed for a month. They captured the quiet drama of the clinic, the pain, the small victories, the frustration, the unexpected bonds. They filmed Malik not as a charismatic leader, but as a persistent, careful craftsman. In one scene, he was teaching Simone how to debride a necrotic wound. His hands, scarred and less nimble, demonstrated the technique slowly. "You have to respect the viable tissue," he said, his voice low. "Your goal isn't just to remove the dead stuff. It's to create the best possible environment for what's still alive to heal. Sometimes that means going painfully slow. Sometimes it means knowing when to stop." The producer, Chloe, watched the footage, her earlier disappointment gone. "It's not what I thought," she admitted to Malik. "It's better. It's real." When the documentary aired, titled The Healing Edge, it was a quiet, critical success. It didn't make Malik famous. It made the clinic's work visible. Donations increased, recruitment improved. He was invited to speak at a conference on integrative chronic care. At the conference in Chicago, he was approached by an elderly man after his talk. "Dr. Sterling, I was moved by your presentation. My wife suffered terribly from pressure ulcers before she passed. The human approach, it matters." The man handed him a card. He was a major donor to medical causes. "He'd like to discuss funding and expansion of your free clinic model, a pilot program perhaps." It was validation of a kind he'd never sought and now deeply valued. That night, in his hotel room, he received an email. The sender was anonymous, but the style was unmistakably glacially familiar. Subject, observational data. Program, Chronic Care Pilot, Atlanta. Principal Investigator, Sterling M. Potential Funder, Jacobs Foundation. Reliability, high. Alignment with stated objectives, 94%. Recommendation, proceed. Jacobs has a history of sustainable, non-interfering grants. Note, Your presentation on iatrogenic suffering, the harm caused by medical systems ignoring patient narrative, was statistically effective, a measurable improvement from prior rhetorical models focused on personal redemption. Conclusion: the asset demonstrates adaptive functionality and positive externalities. Independent operation is sustainable. This channel is now terminated. End of file. It was her final dispatch, not a personal goodbye, but a clinical case note. She had been watching. She had assessed his progress, and she was signing off not with a sentimental blessing, but with a professional endorsement of his viability. It was the most Aisha communication possible. He stared at it, a laugh caught somewhere between despair and awe. Even her exit was a performance review. He deleted the email. Then he opened his presentation notes for the next day. He had work to do. In Florence, Aisha walked through the halls of the Uffizi Gallery after hours, a privilege of her restoration work. She stood before Botticelli's Primavera not as a tourist, but as a custodian. She thought of the layers of varnish, grime, and well-intentioned but damaging past restorations that had obscured its truth for centuries. Her job was to remove what didn't belong, to reveal the original intent, not to judge it. She thought of Malik's documentary, which Klaus had discreetly obtained for her. She had watched it in her studio, alone. She saw his hands, careful and scarred. She heard his voice, stripped of its old arrogance, speaking of viable tissue and creating the right environment. She saw the young doctor, Simone, watching him with wary respect. He had internalized the framework, not the anger, not the punishment, but the framework of accountability, of careful repair, of systemic thinking. He was in his own way doing restoration work. Her fiancé, Luca, found her there. "You're miles away, amore." She smiled, taking his hand. "Just thinking about restoration. It's never really finished, is it? You stabilize, you reveal, you protect. But the painting continues to live, to age. Your work is just a chapter." "A vital chapter," he said, squeezing her hand. "Yes," she said, looking back at the vibrant, timeless figures of the Primavera. "Yes, a vital chapter, but only a chapter." The next week, at the Palazzo Vecchio, a ceremony was held. Chiara Neri was awarded the Premio per la Conservazione del Patrimonio Culturale, a prestigious prize for cultural heritage preservation. She accepted it gracefully, in fluent Italian, thanking her teachers, her colleagues, and the city of Florence for giving a broken thing a place to become whole again. The local press wrote glowing profiles of the talented, private restorer. Aisha Kente was not mentioned. She was, for all practical purposes, gone. That night, she and Lucas celebrated with friends. Wine flowed under the Tuscan stars. Laughter echoed. She was happy, truly, deeply happy. Later, as Lucas slept, she went to her study. From a locked drawer within a locked cabinet, she removed not a USB drive or a document, but a small, inexpensive sketchbook from over a decade ago. The first few pages were youthful, hopeful drawings of her and Malik. Then they stopped. The rest of the book was filled not with pictures, but with columns of numbers, dates, and terse notes in the margins. The original paper ledger. She had digitized it, weaponized it, built an empire of consequence from it. This was the fossil, the source code. She didn't burn it. That would be too dramatic, too final. She took it to her restoration lab at the museum. She placed it in a bath of neutral pH buffer solution, the same used to gently separate damaging adhesive from old parchment. She watched as the cheap ink bled, the numbers blurring, the angry notes dissolving into a blue-gray swirl. The paper itself softened, the fibers relaxing. After an hour, she lifted it out. It was a pulpy, formless mass. The information was destroyed. The structure dissolved. She pressed the water out, then laid the blank, shapeless pulp on a drying screen. It was no longer a ledger. It was just pulp, potential paper. It could be recycled into anything or nothing. She left it there, under the gentle heat of a conservation lamp, and went back to bed. She slept without dreams. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Atlanta Center for Integrative Wound Healing and Chronic Care, a name Malik fought against as too pompous, but the Jacobs Foundation insisted, held its annual fundraiser. The keynote speaker was Dr. Simone Carter, now heading her own surgical unit, who spoke passionately about the mentorship that changed her trajectory. She thanked Dr. Sterling, who sat in the front row, his mother Eleanor beside him, both looking older, quieter, and at peace. Malik no longer thought of Aisha every day. Sometimes a phrase, a situation, the sight of a particular shade of blue in a painting would bring her to mind, not with pain or anger, but with the distant, respectful awe one might feel for a formidable natural force, a hurricane that reshaped the coastline. He was living on the new shoreline it had created. In Florence, Chiara Neri St. Clair, she had taken Luca's name, co-curated a major exhibition on art and healing across the ages. The exhibition catalog included an essay she wrote, comparing the restoration of paintings to the treatment of trauma. Both require an understanding of the original substrate, she wrote. Both require the removal of what harms without destroying what remains. And both are acts of hope, a belief that what is broken still holds meaning, and that meaning is worth the painstaking, often unseen work of repair. The essay was widely praised for its depth and humanity. No one who read it could have imagined its author once kept a ledger of betrayal, or that her understanding of substrate and harm was forged in a much more personal fire. Two parallel lives, forever shaped by their collision, now orbited in separate, stable universes. The debt was not just paid, it had been transformed. The broadcast of good continued from two different stations on two different frequencies, neither aware of the other's signal, both born from the same silent, devastating lightning strike of truth. The ledger was closed. The healing, for both, was finally their own. The Atlanta Center for Integrative Wound Healing was a success. Malik Sterling, now in his late 40s, had achieved a quiet, profound respect in a medical community that had once seen him as a comet burning out. The center, housed in a renovated brick building in a historically underserved neighborhood, was his life's work. It was a place of stubborn hope, where the unteachable cases were sent. Diabetic foot ulcers that defied podiatrists, bed sores that had bored down to bone, the complex wounds of poverty and systemic neglect. Malik's own hands, though scarred and lacking the fine motor control for microsurgery, had developed a different kind of expertise. They were gentle, deliberate, diagnostic. He could assess tissue viability with a touch, sense infection with a glance at the wound margins. He had become a scholar of failure, the failure of bodies to heal, of systems to care, and his clinic was a testament to the slow, unglamorous work of reversing it. Eleanor Sterling, his mother, had become the center's volunteer coordinator and chief storyteller. Her social graces, once used to climb a ladder that no longer existed, were now deployed to comfort families, charm donors, and translate medical jargon into human terms. She and Malik had achieved a fragile, loving truce, built on the rubble of their old ambitions. On a rainy Tuesday, a new patient was referred. Gloria Henderson, 68, severe peripheral arterial disease, a non-healing ulcer on her left heel the size of a $50. Malik reviewed the file. The usual rounds of antibiotics, debridements, wound vacuums, nothing. She was scheduled for a below-the-knee amputation in 2 weeks. When she was wheeled in, Malik felt a jolt that had nothing to do with medicine. Gloria Henderson had the same proud, weary set to her shoulders, the same deep, watchful eyes as Aisha's late mother. It was an echo from a life he incinerated. Gloria took one look at his white coat and shook her head. "Another doctor. You gonna tell me to pray and eat my greens, too?" "No, ma'am," Malik said, pulling up a stool so he wasn't towering over her. "I'm going to ask you about your shoes." That got her attention. For 30 minutes, he didn't look at the wound. He asked about her daily walk to the bus, the fit of her slippers, the temperature of her feet at night, the kind of soap she used. He examined her other foot, her nails, the skin on her shins. He found the clues: the faint mottling, the delayed capillary refill, the brittle hair. "This isn't just a wound, Miss Henderson," Malik said finally. "It's a signal. Your pipes are clogged, but not just in your leg. System-wide. The amputation might get the rotten wood, but the termites are in the house. I want to try and treat the termites first." He proposed an aggressive, coordinated plan: a vascular surgeon colleague for a possible angioplasty, a specific, expensive new biologic dressing to stimulate angiogenesis, rigorous offloading with a custom boot, and close weekly monitoring at his clinic. It was labor-intensive, expensive, and had a 50-50 chance. Gloria eyed him. "Why? They said it's done. Cut it off." "Because," Malik said, the words coming from a place he'd long sealed off, "I believe in salvage operations." Something in his tone reached her. She agreed. The treatment was a battle. There were setbacks, infections, moments of despair. Malik fought her insurance company himself, invoking obscure codes and clinical studies. He called in favors. He met her at the clinic on a Sunday when she thought the dressing had failed. It was the kind of exhaustive, personal investment that went far beyond standard care. 3 months later, the ulcer was closed. Not just healing. Closed. Pink, new skin. Gloria kept her leg. At her final checkup, she gripped Malik's scarred hand. "You saved more than my leg, Dr. Sterling. You saved my dignity. I don't know how to thank you." "Seeing you walk out of here is thanks enough," he said. And for the first time, he fully meant it. The victory was hers, not his. He was just the mechanic. That night, he received an email. No subject, just a link to a real estate listing. Not a Tuscan villa this time. It was a beautiful, modern, accessible ranch-style home in a good Atlanta neighborhood near a park. The price was exactly the sum total of all the payments he had ever made into the Kente Trust. The listing description highlighted, "Single-level living, wide doorways, roll-in shower, perfect for aging in place or mobility needs." Beneath the link, a single line, "An instrument, finely tuned, requires a stable base. A one-time grant, no conditions." It was a down payment. For a home. For him. Not to taunt him, but to support him? To ensure the instrument she had retuned could function without the stress of precarious housing. It was the coldest, most calculating act of generosity he could imagine. It saw him not as a person to be loved, but as a valuable tool to be maintained. He should have been insulted. He should have deleted it. Instead, he felt a strange, hollow ache. It was the closest thing to care she could offer. A severance package for a rehabilitated asset. He didn't buy the house. He let the link expire. But he saved the email. It was the last communication he ever received from the ghost of Aisha Kente. In Florence, Aisha, Chiara, faced a crisis not of her past, but of her present. A masterpiece was in danger. The portrait of a young man by Raphael, one of the jewels of the Palazzo Pitti, was showing early signs of cadmium sickness. The brilliant yellow in the doublet, made with cadmium sulfide, was degrading, darkening to a muddy brown as the pigment reacted with the air. It was a slow, irreversible cancer for the painting. The museum's conservation council was divided. The traditionalists wanted to leave it, accepting the aging of the master. The radicals wanted an experimental invasive laser treatment that could stabilize the pigment, but risked altering the paint layer's texture forever. Chiara, now the head of the Scientific Conservation Division, was the tie-breaking vote. For weeks, she lived in the lab, analyzing microsamples, running spectral imaging, studying the paint's craquelure. The data was inconclusive. The risk was immense. Luca found her at 3 a.m., asleep over a high-resolution digital map of the painting's surface. "Amore, you can't rustle it into submission. It's art, not an equation."
She looked up, exhausted. But it is an equation. Probability of success versus risk of catastrophic loss. I have all the variables. I just can't solve for X. Maybe, Lucas said softly, kneeling beside her. Some equations aren't meant to be solved by one person in a lab. Maybe you need the variable you always ignore. What variable? Intuition. The part of you that isn't a scientist or a strategist. The part that fell in love with art in the first place. He left her alone with the ghost of Raphael. She turned off the spectrophotometer, the UV lamp, the computer screens. She sat in the dark before the masterpiece, illuminated only by the city's ambient glow through the high windows. She didn't see chemical compounds or risk matrices. She saw the young man's arrogant, intelligent eyes, the hint of a smile on his lips, the breathtaking confidence of the brushstroke. She saw a moment of genius, frozen in time, now threatened by the slow creep of entropy. And she thought not of chemical reactions, but of her own life. She had used science and strategy to save herself from entropy, from the slow decay of a bad marriage, from the ruin of her spirit. She had been radical, invasive. She had risked altering the texture of her own soul forever. And it had worked. She had stabilized. She had even thrived. But at what cost? The cost was the part of her that could trust simply, love without a ledger, make a leap of faith based on feeling. That was Luca's gift to her. He was teaching her that variable. She couldn't save the Raphael with the tools of Aisha Kente. She had to use the tools of Chiara Neri, the restorer, not the avenger. The next day, she cast her vote. She recommended a third way, not passive acceptance nor radical intervention, but a middle path. A hermetically sealed, climate-controlled display case filled with inert argon gas to halt the chemical reaction in its tracks, coupled with a revolutionary, non-invasive light filtering film on the case's glass that would block the specific wavelengths triggering the degradation. It was expensive, technically challenging, and would change how the painting was viewed, forever, behind a barrier. But it would preserve the original, untouched, for future generations to someday solve the equation she could not. It was a solution of humility, not hubris. It accepted that some damage could only be contained, not cured. The council, wary of conflict, agreed. As the case was fabricated, Chiara felt a peace deeper than any she had known since arriving in Italy. She had not won. She had not conquered the problem. She had negotiated a truce with time itself. It felt like true restoration. The final thread of the past was pulled by an event outside anyone's control. Eleanor Sterling had a stroke. It was a mild one, a TIA, but it was a thunderclap. Malik rushed to the hospital, the ghost of his father's death haunting him. She was frail, frightened, her speech slightly slurred. The formidable matriarch was gone, replaced by a vulnerable old woman. "Don't you put me in some home, Malik," she whispered, her hand clutching his with surprising strength. "I won't, Mama. You're coming home with me." But his apartment wasn't suitable. It was a walk-up. The bathroom was tiny. He thought of the accessible ranch house from the email. It was no longer on the market. The following week, a packet arrived at the clinic, addressed to him in elegant, familiar script. Inside were architectural plans not for the ranch house, but for a mother-in-law suite addition to his current, modest house. Detailed plans, professionally drawn, by a reputable Atlanta firm. They were beautiful, thoughtful, with wide doors, a zero-threshold shower, and a small private garden view. A note was paper-clipped to the front. Spable Base, Part 2. The grant is flexible. Use this for this. The contractor is paid. A project manager will call you. Say yes. It is the most efficient solution. A. Efficiency. Always efficiency. But this time, the efficiency was laced with something else. An understanding of a filial duty she herself had never owed, but perhaps in her own way, respected. Malik was out of choices. His mother needed safety. He said yes. The construction took 3 months. During that time, Eleanor moved in with him, their relationship undergoing a final, gentle metamorphosis. He bathed her, helped her dress, listened to her stories, not of society triumphs, but of her own childhood, of his father's shy courtship. They found a tenderness that had been impossible in the shadow of his ambition. The suite, when completed, was perfect. It gave Eleanor independence and security. The first night she slept in it, she said to Malik, "That ex-wife of yours, she's a strange woman, but she builds solid things." Malik could only nod. That night, he went into the small backyard of his now modified home. He looked up at the Atlanta stars, washed out by city light. He thought of the Aisha who had documented every failure of his, and the Kiara who had anonymously designed a haven for his failing mother. They were the same person, yet utterly different. The first had been a sculptor of consequences, hacking away at his rotten parts. The second was a restorer, providing support so the remaining, salvageable structure wouldn't collapse. He realized then that her journey had mirrored his own. She had moved from the aggressive, radical surgery of lawsuits and exile to the gentle, supportive containment of trusts and architectural plans, from avenger to conservator. He felt no desire to find her, to thank her, to reconcile. Their story was over. It had been a tragedy, then a harsh lesson, and finally a quiet, separate redemption. But for the first time, he felt something for her that was not fear, anger, or shame. It was a distant, professional respect, as one might have for a brilliant, relentless colleague in a difficult field. The final act of the story belonged to neither of them, but to the world they had indirectly shaped.
A decade after the dissolution of the Kente Trust, a young journalist named Maya, coincidentally, the daughter of the nurse Malik had mentored, Simone, was doing her master's thesis on philanthropic structures as instruments of social change. She stumbled upon the paper trail of the defunct Kente Trust. Its elegance fascinated her, the way it had turned a personal grievance into an engine for scholarships, community grants, and medical research. Her digging led her to the Sterling settlement, a matter of public record. She tracked down Dr. Malik Sterling, now nearing retirement, a revered figure in chronic care medicine. She interviewed him cautiously. He was candid, in a weary, wise way. "It was a debt," he said. "I owed it. Paying it forced me to become someone who could. That's all." "And the founder of the trust, Aisha Kente?" "A private person," Malik said, his face closing. "That chapter is closed." Maya, a dogged researcher, used European art archives to trace a disbursement from the trust that had funded a conservation fellowship in Florence years earlier. The fellowship recipient was listed as C. Neri. Cross-referencing led her to Chiara Neri St. Clair, the noted Italian art restorer. It was a tenuous link, but Maya had a hunch. She wrote a careful, respectful letter to Chiara, laying out her academic thesis and her curiosity about the philosophical link between the Trust's mission of restoring potential and the art of physical restoration. In Florence, Chiara read the letter. She showed it to Luca over breakfast. "The past has a long half-life." "Do you answer?" Luca asked. Chiara thought a long time. She thought of the pulp of her old ledger, recycled long ago. She thought of the Raphael, sleeping safely in its argon bath. She thought of the architectural plans in Atlanta. "No," she said finally, "but I won't ignore it. To ignore it is to fear it." She drafted a reply, not as Chiara, but as the Director of Conservation. "Dear Ms. Maya, thank you for your thoughtful inquiry. While I cannot speak to any personal connection to the philanthropic structure you mention, the parallel you draw is intellectually compelling. All restoration, whether of canvas or community, begins with a recognition of value obscured by damage, time, or neglect. It requires a clear-eyed assessment, respectful tools, and the patience to work at the pace the material requires, not the pace of the restorer's desire for credit or closure. The most successful restoration is often the one that is itself unseen, that allows the original work, be it a life, a painting, or a dream, to speak for itself again as if the damage had never occurred. The restorer's signature is invisibility. I wish you well with your thesis. Sincerely, Dr. Chiara Neri St. Clair, Director of Conservation, Palazzo Pitti. It was the perfect, elegant deflection. It gave the young researcher a profound quote for her thesis while revealing nothing. It was the philosophy that now guided Chiara's life. Visible impact, invisible hand. Maya used the quote as the epigraph of her thesis, which won awards. The story of the Kente Trust and the Sterling Redemption became a minor case study in ethical philanthropy and restorative justice circles. The names were known, but the deepest, most personal truths remained where they belonged, in the silent, separate hearts of the two people who had lived them. Malik Sterling died at 78 in the accessible suite he'd built for his mother, who had predeceased him. He was surrounded by colleagues from the clinic, former patients, and a few old friends. His obituary spoke of his pioneering work in wound care, his mentorship, his second act. It did not mention his first. Chiara Neri St. Clair lived into her 90s in the Tuscan hills, with Luca, her hands steady until the end, tending to a garden of olive trees and lavender. Her professional legacy was a generation of conservators she trained in her philosophy of minimal intervention, maximum respect. Her personal legacy was a love story and a profound, unbroken peace. They never saw each other again. They never spoke. Their lives were parallel lines that had converged in a storm of pain, then diverged forever, each carrying a piece of the other's geometry into a different horizon. The ledger was not just balanced. It had been translated into a different language entirely, the language of healed tissue and preserved beauty, of quiet service and lasting love. The debt was paid in full, in a currency neither of them could have imagined at the start. A life, in each of its own way, finally restored.